Do you know what the last image of the Bible is? Revelation 22. The last image from the last chapter of the last page of the last book of the Bible. Do you know what it is? It's an enthroned image of God coming to us, and it's powerful. Hear these words. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. Nothing accursed will be found there anymore, but the throne of God and the Lamb of God will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and they will reign forever and ever. I really love this text. I love that it's the last word from God. When life's said and done, when time runs out, God is on God's throne, period. God wins. God comes to us in love and is enthroned. And it's here we gather to worship our King, enthroned over all time, space, and people. And then the curtain falls, and the Bible is over. I offer this image because this is what God was trying to teach Israel for years, but they couldn't hear it. Over the last several weeks, we've attempted to explore the fate of Israel and how they engage God from different angles and different points in their history. In this series on the Psalms, we've learned that the Psalters written during Israel's monarchy, their exile, and even their return from exile. And what I find remarkable about the Psalms is that it's in the middle and in the midst of Israel's agony and their loss that they give us some of the most profound teachings. I'll show you what I mean. Instead of believing God will do what God promises to do, Israel goes and finds their own king. They sit him on their own throne. They let him rule over God's promised land, and instead of doing it God's way, they go out and fight their own wars. And here's what the Psalms teach us about that. It doesn't work. It ends badly for Israel. Their monarchy rises for a time, but ultimately falls. Babylon wins, and it's brutal, it's ugly, and it didn't have to go this way. But Israel wanted a king. And truth be told, we all do. Maybe not a literal king, but we have those things in our lives that we put on thrones and we worship them. It could be anything: money, power, prestige. Over the last few years, I've had to stop playing fantasy football online because I was worshiping it more than I was God. And you have these things in your lives too, things that you're addicted to and you can't let go of. This was Israel's problem. They were addicted to power, or at least the rise of power. And because of it, they lost sight of God and ending up losing it all. And here's where the Psalms comes up big for us. The majority of them are written during this exile. And the most profound takeaway from all the Psalter, in my opinion, is Israel's realization while they're in exile. I hinted at this at the beginning of the series, and it's something that I think we need to hear again today. The arc of the Psalter leads to this very important claim. We need no king but God. Monarchies aren't sovereign. Governments aren't holy. Political leaders aren't godly. It takes hundreds of years for Israel to get it, but eventually they do. There is no king needed other than God. And that's why we have Psalm 99. Look at verse 1. The Lord is king. Right out of the gate, we hear their newfound declaration. The Lord sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He's exalted over all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Israel finally gets it. They need no king but God, and neither do we. We can learn a lot from Israel here. God is our king. Even when we don't feel it or we begin to doubt it, God is enthroned over all our lives. Psalm 99 and Revelation 22 remind us that when time runs out, God comes to us enthroned. Psalm 99 is an enthronement hymn, and it's about God coming to us as king. And when you combine it with Revelation 22, we see that God comes to us enthroned, but not to judge, but to love. And it's in this love that we gather to worship our King, reminding us we need no king but God. So enthronement hymns do this. They remind us that God's ultimately king, but they show us we need to do something else too. Worship. In high school, I had season tickets to the Tennessee Titans, the football team. My brother Blake and I would go together, and one game I remember, Peyton Manning was in town. He was playing for the Colts. He lit us up in the first half. Fourth quarter started and we were down by 4 scores, and then Steve McNair, Eddie George, and Derek Mason got to work. We were with 60,000 of our closest friends watching the impossible happen. Defense makes 4 stops in a row, Titans score 4 times in a row. Defense makes a stop, Titans score. Manning then, at the end, did what he always does best. He countered our comeback with a long drive, milking the clock and then capping it off with another score. So there's little time left on the clock. Titans are down 2 with the ball in their territory. The quarterback, Steve McNair, makes a long completion and the receiver gets out of bounds. 2 seconds left on the clock. Coach Fisher sends out the field goal team for a 60-yard kick. This is it. Game's on the line. Kicker has to do the impossible. Snaps good, holds good, kicker boots the fire out of it. It's good. Titans win. The place goes nuts. It's the loudest I've ever heard a stadium. An absolute unbelievable experience. In a post-game interview, Coach Fisher was asked how they made such an unbelievable comeback. He could have accepted the praise for great coaching, but he didn't. He could have put the game on the quarterback and running back's shoulders and praised them, but that's not who he gave the game ball to. Coach Fisher said, "We could not have done it without our fans." And what he meant was this: if it weren't for us 60,000 fans screaming, disrupting Manning's checks and audibles, causing misreads and confusion for the receivers and the offensive line, then we wouldn't have won. Coach Fisher didn't know it, but in that interview, he touched on the reason for why we worship. It's so we can participate in what God is doing on the field. Psalm 99 reminds us that our worship actively participates, and it helps shape what's happening out in the field of life. This is why we worship every week. Worship is an event in which we play an active role in, and I think we should see it that way. Author Anne Lamott words it like this: "The mystery of God's grace meets us where we are, but it never leaves us there." This is true for worship too. Worship is a vital, invaluable expression of our faith because it's where God meets us, and it's where we begin to walk alongside God. Worship is where we tap into the collective consciousness of life. We tap into the flow of God's rhythm, and we enter into the holy sanctums, marking memories and moments and calling on God's providence and extolling our Creator and naming God above all other gods and declaring lordship and then receiving love. Worship is where God's grace meets us, but it doesn't leave us there. It takes us to God and out in the world to then reflect that love of God. And this rhythm, it matters to our daily life. I think King David believed that by gathering and proclaiming, singing, reading, and praying, that this rhythm changes us for the better. And that's why I believe the greatest gift the Psalter gives us is the reminder that we need no king but God, and we should consistently gather to worship. Psalm 99 is an enthronement hymn, telling us that we need no king but God, and that we should worship that king in love.